I still remember the sound of the key. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just a soft click. But to me back then, it felt like the door to the whole world had just closed. I stood in the narrow hallway of the old house in Cleveland, my stomach growling, watching the woman. My father called his new wife twist the refrigerator lock and pull the key from the handle as if she had just completed an important task. "This food has to last the whole week," she said. "Not for someone to sneak around and steal." Someone. She meant me. After my mother died, the house changed so fast I couldn't keep up with what was happening. Family photos disappeared. A different perfume filled the air. And then Evelyn walked in, bringing new rules, a new voice, and a way of looking at me like I was a leftover mistake. My father worked the night shift at a machine shop. He left when the sun went down and came home when I was already at school. Most of the time, it was just me and her in that house. That meant her law was the only law that existed. At first, she only complained that I ate too much. One slice of bread, an extra spoon of cereal, an apple, anything became proof that I was a burden. She started putting labels on the milk, on the meat, on the frozen meals. Her name. My father's name. Not mine. Then the lock appeared. I remember staring at it for hours, trying to understand how something so small could make me feel so small. From that day on, whenever I was hungry, I had to wait for her to open it. If she was busy, I waited. If she was in a bad mood, I went without. I began hiding food. Dry slices of bread in my backpack. A pack of cookies I bought with loose change I found after school. I ate slowly, chewing carefully, as if stretching out the time I was allowed to exist. But secrets didn't survive long in that house. One afternoon, she searched my bag. She held up the cookies like they were something dirty, called me a thief, asked me who I learned that behavior from. I wanted to say I bought them. I wanted to say I was just hungry, but my throat locked. In the end, I only stood there, listening to her describe my crimes like she was talking about a stranger. That night, when my father came home, she told the story her way. I waited for him to look at me, to ask me anything. He sighed, said I had to listen to her. Then he went to shower. His silence was louder than the key. That night I lay in bed, my stomach empty, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I really was the problem. If I were smaller, better, needed less. Would she open the door? I thought about Mom. She had never locked anything away from me. Close to midnight, I heard movement in the kitchen. I walked down the stairs barefoot, light as a shadow. Evelyn was cleaning out the fridge. She took containers that were still almost full, checked the expiration dates, and threw them into a black trash bag. Cold cuts, yogurt, fruit, still good. I stood on the step, watching the food disappear, and something inside me shifted. Not because I was hungry, though I was, but because I understood a simple, cold truth. This had never been about money. It was about the fact that she could. She could feed me, and she chose not to. I went back to my room before she saw me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart beating slow and heavy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't imagine anything different. I just made a promise. One day, I would have enough food to fill every refrigerator I wanted, and I would never need to ask anyone to open a door for me again. Being hungry wasn't the worst part. The worst part was walking into a room and realizing no one truly saw you. I understood that not long after the lock appeared on the refrigerator. Hunger made my stomach ache, but invisibility made me doubt my own existence. Mornings at high school went on as usual. Metal lockers slammed, laughter echoed through the halls, the smell of pizza drifted from the cafeteria. Other kids complained about tests, strict parents, curfews. I listened to them like the Oasis. They were speaking a language from another planet. I was always hungry, but I was starving for something else even more. For someone to ask if I was okay. Maya Thompson was the only person who did. She sat behind me in math class, hair in a high ponytail, always carrying 2 pens, because she knew I usually had none. Once, she nudged her lunch tray toward me and said she wasn't very hungry. We both knew it was a lie, but it was the kindest lie I had ever been given. "You can tell me if something's wrong," she said. I nodded, but I never did. At home, Evelyn had her own story ready. She told the neighbors I was lazy, useless. She told teachers I had attitude problems. When my grades dropped, because I worked evenings and fell asleep in class, she said that was proof. Little by little, her version of me became the truth to everyone else. I saw it in their eyes, the way people decided who you were before you opened your mouth. I walked through conclusions already written, and I was too tired to correct them. I started doing any job I could find, shoveling snow in strangers' driveways, mowing lawns, washing cars, carrying groceries for elderly people in the neighborhood. They paid me in coins, in bread, sometimes in a cold soda. I learned to thank them too much, even when they didn't owe me anything. Every dollar I earned, I hid. Under the mattress, in old shoes, behind a book no one touched. I didn't know exactly what I was saving for. I only knew I needed another door. Evelyn knew I worked, but she didn't call it effort. She called it acting. She said I did it to make her look bad. She told my father I was turning against her. One evening, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I stood in the hallway, used to listening without being part of it. Her voice was high, fast, filled with fake hurt. She said she had sacrificed so much, that I was ungrateful, that I made her feel unsafe in her own home. I waited. I waited for my father to say, "He's just a kid." I waited for him to ask me if it was true, but he only said he was tired, that he didn't want to argue anymore, that I should try harder. I should try harder. I carried those words back to my room, placed them beside the hunger, and wondered how much smaller I had to become to finally fit inside that house. The next day at school, Maya asked why I looked so bad. I said I was fine. She looked at me longer than usual, like she could see the things I was trying to hide. For a moment, I almost told her everything. The lock, the trash bags, the silence. But if I said it out loud, it would become real. And if it was real, maybe there would be no way to fix it. So, I just shrugged. She handed me half her sandwich. I took it, ashamed that my gratitude could be that big. That night, when I came home, the refrigerator was still locked. Evelyn was watching TV, laughing at some show. She didn't look at me. I walked past her the way a ghost walks past the living. In my room, I opened the old shoes and counted the money. Not much, but it was the only thing that belonged to me. I realized something as I sat on the floor, my back against the bed. No one was coming to save me. No teacher, no neighbor, not even my father. If I wanted to be seen, I had to step out of the place where people had already decided not to look. The thought was terrifying and relieving at the same time. It took away hope, but in return, it gave me control. I stopped waiting. I started preparing. The day I left the house, no one stopped me. There was no running after me, no late apology, no one saying I had misunderstood. That morning the air was cold, the kind of Cleveland cold that cuts into your skin when winter refuses to leave. I stood at the door with a small bag, listening to the house behind me stay silent as if I had never existed in it. Evelyn was in the kitchen. I heard a spoon hit a cup, the TV murmuring. She knew I was leaving. I knew she knew. But between us lived an unspoken agreement that my departure was convenient for everyone. My father had gone to work early. He left a note on the table. "Listen to your mother." He didn't know, or didn't want to know, that I wouldn't be there to listen to anyone anymore. I opened the door. No one called my name. The first feeling wasn't freedom. It was emptiness. I stepped onto the sidewalk with a small amount of money hidden in my jacket, saved from years of odd jobs. It wasn't enough for a future, but it was enough for a beginning. And at that moment, a beginning was the only thing I could afford. The bus station was a few blocks away. I walked, hearing my shoes hit the pavement, each step like a question. Are you really doing this? I didn't have a perfect plan, no relatives waiting. Only one certainty. If I turned back, that door would close forever. Maya was waiting there. I didn't tell her everything, only that I was leaving, that I had to. She hugged me tight, the kind of hug you give someone before they jump off a cliff. She shoved a few folded bills into my hand. I tried to refuse, but she shook her head. "Pay me back later," she said. We both knew that wasn't what she expected. The bus arrived with a long screech. I climbed on, took a seat by the window. When it pulled away, I saw Maya grow smaller on the sidewalk, waving until she became a dot of color in the gray city. No one else came. I thought I would cry, but instead I felt something else. Light. Light. Because I no longer had to guess someone's mood. No longer had to ask permission to open a door. The fear was still there, sitting beside me. But this time it didn't get to give orders. The new city didn't greet me with miracles. It greeted me with bills, night shifts, and rented rooms that smelled like damp walls. I took any job: stocking, mopping, collecting carts in the parking lot. I said yes to everything, because I had nothing to bargain with. In the first days, I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I slept little, worked a lot, and spent most of my time observing. The way customers moved, the way managers spoke to suppliers, the way a store lived or died based on tiny decisions outsiders never noticed. I realized I wasn't the best, not the fastest, but I had an advantage no one could teach. I knew what it felt like to have nothing, and when you once had nothing, you saw everything differently. I looked at shelves like opportunities. I looked at every profit dollar like a brick. I didn't dream about nice cars or big houses. I dreamed about safety, something no one could lock away. There were nights I was so tired I slept standing in the storage room. Times I wondered if I was stupid for thinking that leaving was enough to change fate. This city was full of people harder working than me, smarter than me, and they were still stuck. But then I remembered the key. I remembered standing in front of what I needed and not being able to touch it. And I kept going. One evening, while I was gathering carts in the rain, I looked up at the bright supermarket sign. The lights reflected on the wet pavement, making it seem bigger, more powerful. A thought came to me, so clear it made me stop. The person making the most money here wasn't me. Not the manager. It was the owner. The idea felt like someone had opened another door in my head. I walked through it and saw a different world. One where I didn't just work in a store. I could have it. That night, I went back to my rented room, clothes soaked, hands shaking from the cold. I took out my money and counted it, still small. But for the first time, I knew exactly where it was going. I was going to learn how to play this game, not to survive, but to win. I didn't learn business in a classroom. There was no whiteboard, no textbook, no one handing me a diploma saying I was ready. My school was a floor slippery from bleach, a storage room so cold my fingertips went numb. Profit sheets I had to peek at when a manager accidentally left them on a desk. I learned by standing still and watching. After a few months, they started trusting me more. Not because they liked me, but because I was always there. I didn't call in sick. I didn't complain. I took shifts others didn't want. I became a useful piece of furniture, always there. Quiet. Working. The invisibility that once hurt me became an advantage. People talked more when they thought you didn't matter. I heard how they negotiated with suppliers, how they delayed payments, how a small change in product placement could make sales jump. I saw wasted shipments, wrong orders, decisions made from habit instead of thought. And every time, I asked myself, if it were me, what would I do differently? At first they were random questions, but slowly they became blueprints for a future I still didn't dare to say out loud. I moved to the register to understand customers. I watched how they held money, how they hesitated at prices, how families calculated every dollar. I realized people weren't just buying groceries. They were buying peace of mind. If a store could give them that feeling, they would come back. At night, in my tiny rented room, I wrote everything down. What worked, what didn't. I read old books bought at flea markets, watched free videos online, learned words I once didn't even know how to pronounce. Margin, inventory turnover, leverage. There were moments I felt like an imposter, wearing clothes too big from a dream that didn't belong to me. But then I remembered the old kitchen, the lock, the helpless feeling of someone else deciding how much I deserved. No. I had to understand this game. Otherwise, I would always stand on the other side of the door. Maya and I still talked. She was in community college, working as many jobs as I was. Whenever I told her what I observed, her eyes lit up like I had just described some daring plan. "Sounds like you're getting ready to buy a store," she laughed. I laughed too, but deep down the idea was no longer a joke. Years passed like that. I changed jobs, moved to bigger places to learn more. I saw stores fail from arrogance, others succeed because they listened to customers more than their own ego. I memorized everything. Then one day, the opportunity appeared. It didn't come with spotlights. It came as a small notice posted near the break room. A grocery store on the south side was about to close. Too much debt. No way out. Urgent sale. Most people walked past without looking. I didn't. My heart beat fast in that familiar way, like when I stood on the stairs watching the black trash bag. A moment when you understood something important was happening. And if you missed it, you would live with it for a long time. I went to see it. Small store, dim lights, many empty shelves. Employees wore the faces of people already prepared for failure. But I saw something else. I saw leaking money. Changes that could be made immediately. A community that still needed this place. I walked around, my hands trembling slightly. This was it. Not perfect. Not safe. But it was a door. That night, I sat on the floor of my rented room, spreading the money in front of me. Years of savings. If I did this, I would go back to zero. No safety net. No plan B. Fear told me to wait. Learn more. Be safer. But I had waited almost my entire life. I thought about the boy standing in front of the refrigerator. If I turned away now, I would become the one holding the lock. I gathered the money, took a deep breath. I was going to bet. I signed the contract with a shaking pen. There was no victory music, no fireworks. Just an old office room. Fluorescent lights flickering, and a tired owner who wanted out of his financial nightmare as fast as possible. He didn't look at me like an investor. He looked at me like a kid about to learn the most painful lesson of his life. Maybe he was right. But it was my lesson to learn. When he pushed the papers toward me, I thought about every time I had stood in front of a door without a key. I thought about waiting for someone else to decide whether I was allowed inside. This time, I didn't wait. I signed. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like jumping off a cliff and only hoping the ground might change its mind. When I held the store keys for the first time, the cold metal in my palm, I had to stand still for a few seconds, just to breathe. Small. But mine. Mine. Maya was the first person I called. She screamed into the phone, so happy I had to pull it away from my ear. She said she knew it, that I was born to do this. I didn't know if that was true, but I knew one thing. If I failed, I wouldn't blame anyone else. On the first day, I opened earlier than usual. I wanted to see the store before it woke up, when mistakes still lay quietly waiting to be discovered. The smell of old dust and metal mixed in the air. A few lights were dead. The produce section looked sad, like it didn't believe in the future either. The employees arrived, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and pity. They had seen new owners before. People who came with promises, then disappeared when things got hard. I didn't promise anything. I rolled up my sleeves, I cleaned shelves with them, I checked expiration dates. I asked what annoyed them most, what made customers leave. At first, they answered carefully, like I was a test. But as I kept working beside them, the caution began to soften. I changed small things first. Cleared walkways, moved essentials to easier spots, negotiated with small suppliers, promising fast payment if they gave me better prices. I cut pointless expenses no one noticed because that's how it's always been. At night, I was so tired my hands shook when I locked the door. But it was a different kind of tired. It wasn't the exhaustion of helplessness. It was the cost of opportunity. The first week nearly killed me. Revenue crawled upward. Bills didn't. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had just burned years of savings on a dream too big. Fear whispered, "You don't belong here." But I had heard that my whole life. It didn't stop me anymore. I kept showing up every day. I learned customers' names. I listened to complaints. I fixed what I could and wrote down what I couldn't yet. I wanted this store to be a place where people felt respected, even if they only had a few dollars in their pockets. One afternoon, an elderly woman held my hand at the register. She said the store looked brighter today. She said she hoped we would stay. Stay. That word hit me deeper than she could imagine. At the end of the month, Maya and I sat at the small wooden table in my rented room. We looked at the numbers, checking again and again, because we were afraid we were reading them wrong. We made a profit, not big, but real. I leaned back in the chair, feeling like I had just run out of a burning building. I wanted to laugh, cry, sleep for a week. But above all, I felt something I had never had before. I could do this. When I locked the store that night, I looked at the lock longer than necessary. Not with fear, but with understanding. Now I was the one holding the key, and I was going to open the door. First success is dangerous. It whispers in your ear that things will be fine, that you figured out the formula, that from now on the road will be easier. For a few weeks after the store became profitable, I almost believed that lie. I allowed myself to sleep a little longer. Allowed myself to imagine that the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. Business does not reward complacency. It punishes it. The electrical system failed on a busy morning. A supplier suddenly raised prices. An employee quit without notice. Problems arrived all at once, as if someone was testing whether I truly understood what I was doing. I went back to working 16 hours a day. I fixed things one by one, made calls, asked for extensions, negotiated, learned to stay calm even when inside I was panicking. I realized being the owner didn't mean you worked less. It meant there was no one else to blame. There were evenings I sat alone in the small office behind the store, staring at revenue numbers, my heart beating too fast. One mistake, just one, could drag me back to where I started. Back in front of the door. But inside that fear, something else was growing. I began to see patterns. I knew which hours were busiest. I knew which products sold better near the register. I knew which families needed discounts and who would pay more for convenience. Those small things, repeated every day, turned into advantage. I wasn't just operating anymore. I understood, and when you understand, you start seeing beyond four walls. Another store in the neighborhood began to struggle. I heard their employees complain to customers, heard rumors of debt. The scene felt painfully familiar. I looked at it and saw myself from a few years ago. Terrified, but full of possibility. The idea of expanding didn't come to me as ambition. It came as responsibility. If I could make one place better, why not try two? I talked to Maya. She was quiet for a long time. Not because she doubted me, but because she knew the price of jumps like that. "Are you ready to go back to sleepless nights?" she asked. I remembered the nights I'd already had. "I never stopped," I answered. "We borrowed money. The number made me dizzy. I signed new papers with the familiar feeling of fear, but this time, experience stood beside it. I wasn't the boy jumping off a cliff anymore. I was building a bridge while falling. The second store was harder than the first. I couldn't be everywhere at once. I had to learn to trust others, to delegate, to accept that no one would do things exactly like me. Mistakes happened. There were days I wanted to drive to every shelf and fix everything myself. But if I did, I would always have only one store. So I breathed. I built systems, processes, standards. I hired people better than me at the things I wasn't good at. It scared me, but it made the company stronger. Month after month, profit rose. Not in a straight line, but through setbacks and advances that made my heart want to quit many times. But whenever that happened, I looked at what we had built. Customers returned, employees stayed. My name began appearing in conversations I wasn't in. I heard people call me an entrepreneur. I still wasn't used to the word. One morning, I stood in front of 2 stores carrying my name. Staff moving in and out, delivery trucks arriving, phones ringing nonstop. The world I once thought belonged to other people was happening in front of me, and I was part of it. I touched the keys in my pocket, an old habit that never left. I thought about the house years ago, the refrigerator, the way power could make a child feel small. I had come far, but not far enough. If the past could find me once, it could do it again. So I kept expanding. Not because I was greedy, but because I would never let myself be cornered again. That application should have been just another name. Every week I received hundreds of resumes. Familiar stories. Need rent money, need insurance, need a second chance. I respected them. But if I allowed myself to be pulled into every circumstance, I wouldn't stay clear enough to run the company. So I read fast, efficient, distant, until I saw the last name, West. My heart didn't stop. It just changed rhythm. A slow, deep beat. Like when you miss a stair but haven't fallen yet. I read it again, this time slower. Name, Evelyn West. Age, retail experience, financial hardship. Available immediately. There were thousands of people with that name. I knew that. But my body didn't care about logic. It had already gone back to the old kitchen before my mind could catch up. The lock. I leaned back in my chair. The office ceiling was high, white, nothing like where I started. I had built an entire world to avoid going back there. And now it was filling out a job application. I could pass the resume to HR. I could pretend I didn't see it. No one required me to be involved. Success gave me that right. The right to avoid. But I had spent my whole life running from the past. Maybe it was time to turn around and look at it. I requested an in-person interview. Maya looked at me when I said that. She didn't ask much, but she was smart enough to read what I wasn't saying. She only nodded and said she would prepare the room. In the days before the meeting, I found myself strangely quiet. Not angry, not panicked, just a sharp focus, as if everything in my life was lining up toward a single point. I wondered if she recognized the company name, if she read the news, if she had ever seen my face somewhere and scrolled past without knowing. The thought was funny and cruel at the same time. That morning, I arrived early. I stood behind the glass, watching the reception area. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly, even though time had added tired lines to her face. Smaller than I remembered, less certain. She wore the nicest outfit she had. She carried an old bag, holding it tight as if letting go would make everything fall to the floor. She spoke to the receptionist in a polite voice I had never heard directed at me. I wondered if power always changed people's voices like that. HR interviewed her first. Procedure. I watched through the camera in my office, not missing a single movement. I saw her smile when she talked about work ethic. I heard her say she always tried to take care of family. Family. The word passed through me like an old cut. Finally, they messaged that I could come in. I stood up. The strangest part was I wasn't shaking. For years I had imagined this moment, thought I would be filled with rage or triumph or something dramatic. But I only felt clarity. I opened the door. She turned when she heard the sound. Her eyes passed over me like over a stranger. A man in a suit, confident, belonging in this room. I saw the moment recognition began. Like a light turning on. Her lips parted, color drained from her face. "Leo?" she whispered. For the first time in my life, I saw her without a prepared answer. No rules, no lock between us. Just me, standing straight, and the past waiting for me to speak next. My entire childhood led to this room. Not the awards, not the articles, not the revenue numbers hanging on the glass walls outside. Those were detours. The real destination had always been this moment when she and I stood across a table with nothing left to shield us. Evelyn sat very straight. Her hands rested on her lap, clenched so tight the knuckles were white. I could see she was trying to stay calm, trying to find the voice that once helped her control everything in the old house. But this room wasn't hers. It was mine. I sat down. No rush. There was no need to hurry. Power had a different rhythm when you were no longer afraid of losing it. She spoke first. Asked if I had been well. Asked what I had done all these years. Polite, careful questions, as if we were distant relatives meeting again at a funeral. I almost laughed. For years I had imagined what she would say if we met again. An apology, an excuse, blaming circumstances. I had prepared for every scenario. None of them arrived. There was only fear. and I realized that mattered more than any apology. I asked her why she needed the job. She said life changed, said things were hard, said she was ready to work hard, to start over, to do whatever was necessary. Whatever. I heard those words, and a boy inside me repeated them in a kitchen far away, where I had once been willing to do anything just to have a door opened. Time truly was a cruel circle. I could do many things right now. I could ask her if she remembered the lock. I could retell every night I stood hungry in the hallway. I could make her small the way I had been. No one in the company would stop me. Many would even say I had the right. But when I looked at her, I no longer saw the giant of my childhood. I saw an old, tired woman who had finally met a world that didn't bend to her will. Power had left her, just as it once left me. And it made me understand something unexpected. If I hurt her the same way, I would not escape the past. I would become it. The room was silent. I heard the air conditioner, my heartbeat, the years passing between us. I said my company hired based on ability and attitude, that people deserved the chance to prove themselves. I said we had clear rules, and if she worked here, she would follow them like anyone else. I looked directly into her eyes as I spoke. No privileges, no exceptions, only an open door, and the choice to walk through it. Her eyes reddened. I didn't know if it was shame, relief, or both. She nodded again and again, said thank you, said she would not disappoint me. I believed her. Not because she had changed, but because my system did not allow anyone to become a monster in a kitchen anymore. I stood up and offered my hand. She took a second before grabbing it. Her hand was cold, trembling slightly. I remembered that feeling, standing in front of someone who could decide your life. I used to hate it. Now I intended to use it differently. I told her HR would contact her about shifts and training. My voice was calm, professional, the same voice I used with hundreds of other employees. But inside, a very old door had opened and closed for the last time. I walked into the hallway. Maya was waiting in the distance, asking nothing. She only looked at me and smiled softly, as if she knew I had just done the hardest thing in my life. Maybe she was right. I touched the keys in my pocket. I was no longer the boy who waited, and I was not the one who locked doors. I was the one who decided they would open.